My name is Amelia Carter. And that evening, my younger sister, Lily Carter, announced her engagement. It happened during dinner at our parents' house. Everyone was sitting around the large table. Mom was pouring wine. Dad was telling some story from his work. I was barely listening. Everything was calm. Just an ordinary family dinner. Until Lily suddenly said, "We have some news." She had always known how to attract attention. Since childhood. If there were 10 people in the room, Lily would make sure all 10 of them were looking at her. She smiled slightly. And took the hand of the man sitting next to her. "We've decided to get married." Mom gasped. Dad immediately started smiling. "Lily, that's wonderful," Mom said. Dad raised his glass. "Daniel, congratulations." "Yes. Daniel Brooks." The man sitting next to my sister had once been my boyfriend. We had been together for almost 3 years. And when our relationship ended, the whole family decided that it was just life. It happens. People break up. I tried to think the same way. But at that moment, sitting at the table and looking at their intertwined fingers, I suddenly felt an old, long-forgotten feeling rising inside me. Not jealousy. No. Something else. Something heavier. Lily was smiling. She always smiled like that when she knew she was the center of attention. "And that's not all," she said. She raised her left hand. And showed the ring. Everyone immediately started talking. Mom leaned closer. "Oh my God, it's beautiful." Dad laughed. "Daniel, you really did well." But I could barely hear their voices. Because at that moment, I was looking only at the ring. At the thin gold band. At the small stone. And at the familiar little scratch on the side. My heart stopped for a second. Because I knew that ring. I knew it too well. Once, Daniel Brooks had given it to me. And in that moment, I realized one thing. My sister, Lily Carter, had not just announced her engagement. She had put on her finger the ring that once belonged to me. For a few seconds, I just stared at the ring. At the small scratch on the side of the stone. I remembered exactly how it appeared. Once, Daniel Brooks and I were walking along the waterfront in the evening. I accidentally brushed my hand against a metal railing. He laughed and said, "Now this ring will be the only one like it in the world." I laughed too back then. Because at that moment, it really felt like something special. And now that ring was on my sister's finger. Lily Carter. "Amelia," my mom suddenly said. "Why are you staring like that?" I slowly lifted my eyes. Everyone at the table was now looking at me. I looked at the ring again. "That," I said quietly. "That ring." I stopped. For a second, I even thought that maybe I was mistaken. But no. I knew it too well. "That's the same ring," I said. The room grew a little quieter. Lily tilted her head slightly. "Which one?" I looked straight at her. "The one Daniel gave me." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Lily slowly smiled. Calmly. Almost lazily. "Oh, that ring?" She looked at her hand. As if she were seeing it for the first time. "Well, yes." She shrugged. "It's beautiful." I felt a strange feeling rising inside me. Not anger. Not yet. More like cold. "You knew that was my ring," I said. Lily looked at me again. And her smile widened just a little. "Amelia," she said softly. "It was your ring." She emphasized the word slightly. "But now it's mine." Someone at the table shifted uncomfortably. Mom quickly said, "Amelia, it's just a ring." Dad nodded. "Yes, that's all in the past." But I barely heard them. I was looking at my sister. And in that moment, a thought suddenly appeared in my mind, one that had never crossed it before. Lily had always taken what she wanted. Since childhood. If she liked something that belonged to me, it became hers. If she liked attention, she took it for herself. And sitting at that table, for the first time I thought about something I had always tried not to think about. What if Daniel Brooks was not the exception? That thought came suddenly. And for some reason, it immediately felt too logical. I looked at Lily Carter, at the ring on her finger. And suddenly I began remembering things I had tried not to think about before. Small details. Strange moments. Random words. "Amelia, you're overthinking this," Mom said, trying to smile. "It's just a ring." But it wasn't about the ring. I looked at Lily again. She was sitting completely calmly, even leaning slightly back in her chair, with that same expression she always had when she got what she wanted. I knew that smile. Since childhood. If I brought home a new book, Lily would suddenly say she wanted that exact one too. If I had something new, clothes, a phone, even friends, somehow after a while it would become hers too. And our parents always said the same thing. "Amelia, you're older. You should be wiser." I learned to give in. It was easier that way. But now my sister was sitting in front of me, holding the hand of the man I once planned to build a life with. Daniel Brooks. He had been silent almost the whole time. I noticed that he looked at me once, and quickly looked away. That was strange too. Daniel had never been someone who avoided conversations. When we were together, he always spoke directly. Sometimes too directly. And that was something I once liked about him. But now he looked like he wanted this dinner to end as quickly as possible. "Amelia," Lily suddenly said. "You're not going to ruin the evening, are you?" She said it lightly, almost playfully, as if this whole situation were some minor awkward moment. "We just announced our engagement." She squeezed Daniel's hand slightly. "That's good news." Mom immediately nodded. "Of course it is." Dad smiled too. "Daniel is a good guy." The words sounded strange, because just a year ago, that same good guy had been mine. I looked at him. "Daniel," I said calmly. He looked up. "You kept the ring?" He fell silent for a second. Then he answered, "Yes." Short. And looked away again. "I thought you sold it," I said. He shook his head. "No." Lily laughed lightly. "Amelia, it's just jewelry." She turned the ring on her finger and added, "And now it's part of our story." I looked at her. And in that moment something slowly came together inside me. Because suddenly I remembered one thing. A moment that once seemed insignificant, but now looked completely different. It was a few months before our breakup, when Lily suddenly began appearing around us too often. At first by accident, then more and more frequently. And that was exactly when Daniel started changing, becoming colder, more distant. And that evening, sitting at that table, I asked myself a question for the first time, one I had always been afraid to ask. What if all of this wasn't a coincidence? I sat at the table and looked at Lily Carter. She was still smiling. Calmly. Confidently. Like someone who was used to getting what she wanted. And suddenly, one by one, things began to surface in my memory, things that once seemed random, but now formed a strange picture. I remembered one evening. Daniel Brooks and I were having dinner at my apartment. Talking. Laughing. And suddenly Lily called me. She said she was nearby and decided to stop by. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She did that often. But now, remembering that evening, I suddenly realized something. She spent almost the whole time looking at Daniel. Too attentively. Too long. Back then, I told myself I was imagining it. Then it happened again. And again. Lily began appearing around us more often. Sometimes by accident. Sometimes just stopping by. Sometimes because she was bored. And every time she talked to Daniel as if she had known him for years. Easily. Naturally. Sometimes even too naturally. Back then, I didn't think about it. Because she was my sister. And Daniel was my boyfriend. I simply couldn't imagine that anything else could be happening between them. But then strange things began. Daniel started asking questions. Unusual ones. Did you really tell Lily you're unsure about our relationship? I was surprised. No. She said you were worried that I take everything too seriously. I laughed. I never said that. He shrugged then. Maybe I misunderstood. At the time, it seemed like a small thing. But there were more and more small things like that. Conversations. Hints. Doubts. Daniel slowly became colder. We began arguing more often. He said I was becoming distant. I didn't understand what he meant. And then one day he said, maybe we're just different people. A few weeks later, we broke up. Back then, I thought it was simply the end of a relationship. That happens. But now, sitting at that table and looking at the ring on Lily Carter's hand, I suddenly felt everything fall into place. I slowly looked at her. Tell me one thing, I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. What? I looked straight into her eyes. When exactly did you start seeing each other? The table went silent again. Lily looked at Daniel for a second. Then back at me. And that familiar smile appeared on her lips. The one I had known since childhood. The smile of someone who knows the answer perfectly well. But isn't in a hurry to say it. Lily looked at me for a few seconds. Then she slowly shrugged. Amelia, she said calmly. Why does it matter? Her voice was light. As if we were talking about something completely unimportant. But I didn't look away. It does matter, I replied. She looked at Daniel Brooks again. And for a moment, a strange pause filled the room. Daniel tensed slightly. I noticed his fingers tighten. But he said nothing. Then Lily looked back at me. We started talking, she said slowly, before you two broke up. The words sounded almost calm. But the room immediately became quieter. Mom frowned. Lily. But my sister continued as if she hadn't heard her. Not the way you think. She tilted her head slightly. We were just talking. I felt that cold feeling rising inside me again. Talking? I repeated quietly. She nodded. Yes. And smiled again. Daniel used to text me a lot. I looked at him. He was still silent. Because you asked me to talk to him, Lily continued. I frowned. What? She sighed, as if she had to explain something obvious. Amelia, you were always saying you weren't sure about your relationship. Something inside me suddenly froze. I never said that. Lily shrugged again. You texted me about it. I shook my head. No. She looked at me. And a strange expression appeared in her eyes. Almost mocking. That's strange, she said. Because I still have the messages. I slowly felt the air in the room grow heavier. What messages? Lily leaned forward slightly. Messages where you said Daniel was too serious. She paused. That you weren't sure you wanted a future with him. A chill ran down my spine. Because I had never written anything like that. Never. I looked at her. And suddenly everything became completely clear. You wrote them yourself, I said quietly. Lily was silent for a second. And then, she smiled. Not denying it. Not defending herself. Just smiling. And in that moment I finally understood one thing. My sister had not simply fallen in love with Daniel Brooks. She had deliberately destroyed our relationship. Because Lily Carter always got what she wanted. For a few seconds, no one at the table said a word. I looked at Lily Carter. She was still smiling. Calmly. As if we were discussing something trivial. You wrote them yourself, I repeated. Mom frowned. Amelia, that's nonsense. But I didn't take my eyes off Lily. She tilted her head slightly. And a bored smile appeared on her face. Amelia, she said softly. You always take everything too dramatically. You texted Daniel pretending to be me, I said. Now I was sure. Completely. She didn't answer right away. She just slowly turned the ring on her finger. The same ring. The one I once wore. Well, she finally said. Maybe I helped the situation a little. The room fell silent again. Mom turned sharply toward her. Lily, what does that mean? Lily calmly shrugged. Nothing special. She looked at me. Amelia wasn't sure about the relationship anyway. I felt the cold rising inside me again. I never said anything like that. Lily smirked. But he thought you did. She leaned slightly forward. And sometimes it's enough to just guide someone in the right direction. Daniel suddenly looked up. Lily. But she waved her hand. Oh, stop. She looked at me again. And her voice became a little harder. You really think Daniel broke up with you just because of me? She laughed softly. Amelia, you ruined it yourself. I looked at Daniel. Is that true? I asked. He was silent. For a few seconds. Then slowly said. I thought you had doubts. Something inside me finally broke. Because she was texting you pretending to be me. Daniel looked at Lily. You said Amelia asked you to talk to me. Lily shrugged. I just told him what I thought you were feeling. She smiled. And as you can see, I wasn't wrong. I looked at her. And suddenly realized something simple. She felt no guilt. Not even a little. Because for Lily this had never been betrayal. For her, it was a victory. She got what she wanted. As always. I took a slow breath. And suddenly felt a strange calm. Because in that moment I understood something else. Lily Carter had never just wanted my boyfriend. She wanted my life. And maybe that was exactly why she tried so hard to take it. I looked at Lily Carter. And the longer I looked at her, the clearer one simple feeling became. This hadn't started today. Not tonight. Not the moment she announced her engagement. It had started much earlier. Since childhood. Suddenly I remembered an old moment. I must have been about 10 years old. I got a bicycle as a gift. Red. I had dreamed about it all summer. And when I finally got it, Lily didn't say anything at first. But a week later she got one too. The same one. Only better. Newer. More expensive. Back then our parents said. Lily just wanted one too. I didn't think much of it then. But later it happened again. And again. If I liked something, Lily suddenly wanted it too. If I made a new friend, Lily quickly became more interesting to them. And every time it ended the same way. Lily got what she wanted. And I learned to give in. Because it was easier. I looked at her again. She was still sitting next to Daniel Brooks. Her hand rested on the table. And the ring was shining on her finger. My old ring. You always did this, I said quietly. She frowned. Did what? Take what you liked. She smirked. Amelia, don't start. But I continued. The bicycle. She rolled her eyes. Seriously? My friends. She shrugged. That's called being social. I looked at her. And now Daniel. The table fell silent again. Lily sighed slowly. As if she was tired of the conversation. Amelia, she said calmly. He's not your property. She squeezed Daniel's hand slightly. He made his choice. I nodded. Yes. For a moment I looked at Daniel. Then back at Lily. And suddenly I felt a strange clarity inside me. Because in that moment I finally understood something. Lily didn't just take what she liked. She took what belonged to me. Because for her it had always been important to prove one thing. That she could get everything. Even if it already belonged to someone else. I slowly picked up the napkin from the table. Placed it beside my plate. And looked at my sister. You know, I said calmly. She raised her eyebrows. What? I looked at the ring. You always got what you wanted. I paused for a moment. I hope this time it truly makes you happy. Lily looked at me with mild irritation. She clearly wanted this conversation to end. For everyone to start smiling again. For Mom to pour more wine. For the evening to return to that moment where she was the center of attention. But I no longer felt anger or resentment. Only a strange calm. I looked at Daniel Brooks. He was sitting next to her and looked like he didn't understand how he had ended up in the center of this scene. And suddenly I realized something. This was no longer about Daniel. Not at all. I looked at Lily Carter again. And suddenly I saw her a little differently. Not as my sister. Not as a rival. But as someone who had spent her whole life trying to prove one simple thing. That she could get everything. Even if it already belonged to someone else. She didn't just take my boyfriend. She took what had been mine. Because for her it had always been a game. Who was better? Who was brighter? Who got more? And suddenly I understood something else. She didn't steal my life. She tried to steal it. But my life had never been Daniel Brooks. My life had never been that ring. And maybe that was exactly what Lily could never understand. I slowly stood up from the table. Several people immediately lifted their heads. Mom frowned. Amelia, where are you going? I looked at my sister. She was still holding Daniel's hand. The ring on her finger glittered under the light. I said calmly. You always got what you wanted. She smirked slightly. So? I looked at the ring. Then back at her. I hope this time it makes you happy. She frowned. I took my bag from the chair. And added quietly. Because I'm not giving you my life anymore. I turned toward the door. And for the first time that evening, I felt lighter inside. As if something that had held me in place for a long time had finally let go. I opened the door and walked out of the house, leaving Lily Carter, Daniel Brooks, and the ring that once belonged to me behind. Forever.